An extra disclaimer warning from post-editing Mur. If I do sound a little intense in this video, trust it is not me being upset or angry. I've realized that I just sound really angry, and that is not my intention at all. I'm very passionate about this topic, so I apologize if I do come off as a little bit. Really do not have a better word for this, but that is not what this video is at all. It's more of a passionate rambling, if anything. That's all. So, before we start to get into the nitty-gritty and really go into depth about this, I do want to start with a little disclaimer, little warning of sorts. But I think this will just be like a reminder that you are entitled to have your own opinion on this. This is a very divided topic. People can feel many different ways on many different levels about headcanons. So, I just kind of want to share my personal growth and how my opinions sort of changed on headcanons. So, I'd love to hear your thoughts on headcanons. I'd love to talk about them. So, please leave those in the comment section. So, now let's actually get into the bulk of what we're talking about today, and that is headcanons, obviously. Years ago, maybe like 2 or 3 now, I was on the exact opposite side of the views on headcanons, and by that I mean headcanons take away from the original character, they mischaracterize the original character. They should just make their own character if they're going to headcanon the character into non-existence, right? I also had similar views on race bending, and that was obviously a reflection from the art commentary YouTubers I watched and their opinions on it, and that's how I formulated my opinion on it. But after a while of just kind of leaving it at that, and sort of going through my own experiences, I've kind of gone in the exact opposite direction, where I don't really mind headcanons. In fact, I like headcanons, and especially I enjoy seeing people do race bending edits, and I think it's really neat. So obviously, very large 180. How did we get here? I think the biggest thing that kind of changed my opinion on headcanons is that they're never really going to affect the original character. That variant of the character is always going to exist and whatnot. And even though there might be popular headcanons that exist within the fan base or the fandom, whatever, that's always going to, not affect the original version. And sometimes, yeah, I get it. Seeing a character be mischaracterized by headcanons can be frustrating. But I'm not really going to go out of my way to say, I hate headcanons. Freak those things, And I think the reason why a lot of people headcanon, at least from my experience, my most, up there headcanon, as in, I say this a lot, my favorite being Papyrus is Filipino. And obviously, 1, Papyrus is a monster, 2, not human, and probably isn't Filipino if he were to be humanized. It's comforting to think that you can share something with a character besides, personality, things to relate to beyond what was already given from the content that was original. And obviously when somebody comments on something, oh, blank canon, they don't actually mean that this is canon. It's more or less a joking statement, if that wasn't apparent enough already. And in general, the thing that I will repeat, I think, in this multiple times, the original version of the character will always exist. That is the base character. They are not going to disappear because of other people's headcanons and whatnot. And headcanons are very different from queer coding or just coding in a character in general. So those things are canon adjacent or canon implied. So, it's a little difficult to say that that coding doesn't exist or is not explicitly stated, so it doesn't really involve the character, which I could do a whole video about, and I might, depending on how long I think that would be. Anyway, one of the terms that I hear a lot of people use when they have headcanon specifically for a character being of mixed background or headcanoning them to be a different, race with different backgrounds. People tend to call that, it's a really horrible term, blackwashing. This is not a term. This does not exist. Because, looking back in history, whitewashing is a term that was used to exclude people of color, specifically black people, from, being in spaces and existing. But this also happens with every other culture where they are whitewashed, essentially. And it's the existence of removing somebody's culture, misrepresenting a culture, and taking something away from those original peoples, if that makes sense. So blackwashing, in that vein, is not a thing, because whitewashing, essentially, if we break it down into its definition factually, it is whitewashing. Washing as in washing away the person's race and all of the cultural aspects of something, right? You cannot do that with blackwashing. And again, blackwashing is not a thing. It is race bending. Those are two very different things. And often I'll see people go, this thing erases culture. This blah 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 erases culture. But in many of the cases with the characters they do this with, they're not erasing the original race. And by that I mean they are making them of mixed descent. And I do not see people saying these things about people headcanoning a character to be of mixed race, but them to be both, white descent. Or, how do I explain this? If you were to headcanon a character, maybe as Asian, maybe like Japanese French, or Korean American, whatever, right? They do not get as much backlash as somebody who might headcanon somebody as Blasian or of mixed race that is culturally different from the Eurocentric stuff, right? So, there's also a little bit of colorism that is ingrained into this viewpoint of headcanoning. And, again, I will say this multiple times, blackwashing is not a thing. I believed it was a thing. It is not. Don't use that term, please. Thank you. I see a lot of the times people just kind of love to say, make your own characters if you're going to headcanon a character this much. And I have two things to say about that. One, again, the original version of the character exists for your enjoyment. That is the person's personal headcanons. It does not affect you in any way, shape, or form. And two, trust me when I tell you, a lot of these people already do make original characters with their representation. I have majority Filipino characters, and sometimes they are mixed, but they are still, at some point, half Filipino. I love putting Filipino people into media because it was a huge gap of representation, and at some point are misrepresentation. And I grew up not having a lot of Filipino characters in animation or TV shows to really look up to. So sometimes I will kind of reflect that in headcanons. That's why people do it. Misrepresentation, lack of representation. That's its whole purpose. And one of the many things I think is very funny about people saying make your own original characters, if you are to diverge from canon as much as you do, is alternate universes diverge from canon so often. And I think one of the best examples of this is if we look at Undertale. Wow, I'm tying this back to Undertale, guys. Who would have guessed? Anyway, Undertale has a vast and humongous array of original alternate universes. And all of them are really, really cool. But they also diverge from the original characters, their original motivations, and the base characters so much that they kind of became like their own entity, but they are still very much associated with the base game, if this makes sense. Because if you were to look at every other Sans AU, while they are so different from the original variants, they still do have, similarities to the original Undertale, right? So, headcanons, non-canon things, and the original versions of characters can still exist, and sometimes, even alternate universes can have popular headcanons that cause a divergence with that. And by that, we're going to be looking at Underswap. Wow, we're getting even deeper in here. Anyway, with Underswap, the whole thing I'm going to be talking about is Underswap Sans. Okay, this is already very far diverged from the original canon, right? But people headcanoned this character a lot, and by that I mean they infantilized Underswap Sans a lot. And I will, at some point, be making a video about infantilization, so please look out for that. But they infantilized him and fan headcanoned them so much that there's a divergence with the character. But at the same time, those two characters still exist inasmuch as the two versions of Underswap and original Undertale exists. So you can kind of just leave it be, because in the end it's not going to affect the original version of those characters that you enjoy. And while I know, again, how frustrating it is when people misinterpret a character while headcanoning, in the end, it's really not affecting anybody, okay? And, yeah, I think it's just easier to be the bigger person, and if it frustrates you that much, I just tend to, block it. I've kind of just stopped really, interacting with things that frustrate me, and it's just made my life a lot easier on the internet, And, yeah, headcanons are really cool, and I think that the pushback from headcanons has always existed, in as much as, original fandom has existed since forever. There's always been discourse about this. I'm sure there will continue to be discourse about this as much as there is in the present, but I just kind of wanted to give my thoughts on all of this and how I've kind of slowly moved in the opposite direction when it comes to headcanons. Anyhow, I'd love to hear your thoughts on headcanons, what your favorite headcanon for a character may be, all of that stuff. I love discussing things in the comments. It's great. And yeah, I think I will restate this one time before I end the video. The version that is headcanoned to that extent can still exist inasmuch as the original version exists. It does not affect you. I promise. That's all. Alright, I think I've let this run on too long anyway. Bye!